Hmm. Uh, huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Reuben Olson.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cryptid Clues. I'm your host, Reuben Olson, joined by our other main man, Taylor Field. This episode features plenty of hums and haws as we gather little evidence for the answer to a popular Bigfoot question. Where are the bodies? Well, to answer the body question, you'll have to listen to this episode, but as I segue into our 30-second shilling moment, I'll tell you that if you open your email and edit the body of the message box, you can ask us questions over at our email, CryptidClues@gmail.com. Check out our website at CryptidClues.ca and join our Patreon for as low as $1 for ad-free, exclusive content and more at patreon.com/CryptidClues. Finally, you can find us on almost all social media. Now for you, Taylor. You take it from here.
That was flawlessly executed, sir. Bravo.
Loving the new microphone.
So you said it. A question out there. Where are the bodies? Now, this is something that's been asked for a very long time. We find the tracks, the poop, nestings, but where are the deceased going? Now, we often think humans were the only ones who had this rational, deathly awareness, you could say, but this reaches beyond us. For example, let's look at apes and monkeys. A ton of research has shown us that common behaviors have emerged between us and them, including them actually carrying their dead, defending their deceased from threats, and exhibiting grief-like responses, stacked with a multitude of stories and encounters of apes and monkeys actually mourning for their dead. And it goes beyond that. They'll actually still groom the bodies and everything. So this is something that's, I don't know if it would be necessarily a lack of understanding of the deceased, but just kind of maybe not even a ceremonious way, but just kind of like a letting go process more so, and just keeping it with you as you continue on for a little bit. Now, again, that's not concrete evidence by any means, but we can see by our intelligence, and yes, as stupid and as primitive as we are, we still have intelligence. And that intelligence of apes and monkeys, let's for now meet in the middle with Bigfoot. We know that they communicate with each other. They hold on to their social groups extensively, and they have a strong sense of awareness in themselves and their surroundings. So applying what humans and apes do with their dead, let's invest a little bit into the concept that Bigfoot also too bury their dead. I'm curious, Reuben, this isn't the first time you've heard of burying the dead with Bigfoot, is it?
No, it's not. Actually, I'd like to back it up just for a second here. When you're talking about monkeys and stuff grieving their dead, I think it's worth noting that if we go to birds like crows, for instance, they've actually been witnessed having like entire funerals. They'll gather, like all the local crows in an area, will gather around the body of a crow. They'll bring it twigs and branches and stuff. They'll all kind of dance around, and then they'll just stand there, and any immediate relatives to that dead crow will stay behind and hang out with the body for a while longer before they fly off.
So would you say it's more in line with this rational awareness that something has happened and that they're no longer among the living? Or would you say it's just like we're just going to send it off, I guess, or just kind of like keep this deceased with the pack kind of a thing?
No, I think that at least on the crow side of things, they're definitely aware that that crow is dead.
Yeah.
But you asked me a question before I rudely took the topic back a little bit there. What was that question again, Taylor?
It wasn't rude at all. I was curious on your knowledge where Bigfoot bury their bodies and if you've heard of that before.
I mean, I don't really think there's a lot of reports where we have any knowledge of Bigfoot bodies in general. There's some hunters saying that they've, shot at one or whatever. I know in the Bigfoot movie Exists, they kill a young Bigfoot, and the plot of that movie is for spoiler alert for anyone wanting to watch Exists, skip ahead like 30 seconds. But the mama Bigfoot that haunts them the entire movie drags everybody over to the shallow grave and shows all of the humans her dead young one, and which is why she's angry and killing them all. Of course, that's a movie. That's not anything real. I can't think of anything that I don't have any knowledge, honestly. This is an entirely new topic for me. Obviously, there's a question, where are the Bigfoot bodies? And we can theorize and I can look up things, but nothing pre-existing. This is an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. I like how you inputted that. This is kind of where I look at to the wonderful circle of life, bring that as a factor here. New life is born, then dies, fades into the ground, and helps grow new life. So bear in mind that when we get to decomposition, basically. So touching once again on the behavior of apes and monkeys, this is again, before we get to the decomposition thing, their behavior of moving their dead, it could be days or more before they finally let go. All the while still, like I said, grooming, inspecting, protecting, and in rare occurrences, even eating parts of it before abandoning it. Now, this is something, for this theory, we could apply to Bigfoot and how they handle their deceased, thus leaving us in a position where we can't find a body. When we look at decomposition of essentially any living life form out in a temperate climate, it can take as early as 3 weeks to as late as several years for a body to completely decompose into a skeleton. Again, this is subject to temperature, humidity, insects, and if the body is in like a water or a muck like swamp or something like that. The skeletons themselves, however, they will decompose, but that can take around 20 years, and that's if the soil is very fertile and again, that temperate climate. So are in fact these bodies possibly being moved after they die to an area where maybe it is holding a special kind of purpose to these beings, kind of like you highlighted in that movie there, that area was specifically important to that mama Bigfoot. And again, just a movie, but you never know. We have our homes and places we like to go to. And that's, I mean, I'm not saying humans just bring their dead person home with them or anything like that, but home is a safe place. It's, home is where the heart is. And I think it's the same thing for these animals. They probably have a good spot that they like to bring the deceased to. And then that's where they maybe decompose, but...
Well, think about elephant burial grounds.
I just immediately thought of Lion King all of a sudden.
Oh, sorry. Actually, I was thinking of Lion King earlier when you brought up the circle of life.
That too, that was a reference for it as well. But I mean, highlight for the listeners, highlight the elephant burial grounds.
Well, there's really not much to highlight, but essentially, elephants will all go to one spot to die and pass away, and then all the other elephants will be sad and mourn that elephant. Kind of the same situation as the crow thing, but when you find elephant skeletons out in the wild, there's a whole bunch of them together.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving from there on to cause of death, when was the last time a human killed one of these things? Hunter, road accident, car crash. I honestly would say probably never really, at least ever recorded. So
I would say, yeah, definitely never recorded, definitely reported in like some Sasquatch Chronicles episodes, for instance, hunters shooting other Bigfoots. There's some stories of Bigfoot getting shot, but nothing concrete and nothing where the body really is recovered or brought to the press.
Yeah, that's the kicker. I mean, there are definitely some reports of like, yeah, they're firing off at these things, but it's super rare to hear someone talk about, hey, we killed one. And then even more rare, like, yeah, we dragged the body out of there. I'm sorry, what? You dragged this thing? Or probably like 15, 20 miles through the bush?
Well, and if you find one, hunt one, and kill one, there's probably more around. So if you kill a Bigfoot, the rest are going to come after you. So for people that maybe have been successful and hunted one of these things, they might be missing persons as well and never have made it out of the woods with that body.
Absolutely. Again, goes hand in hand with at least never being recorded. So let's run with them dying of old age or from each other. Maybe one social group dislikes another and it results in disputes with some dying. Maybe these territorial events and more or less natural deaths result in the bodies being carried away after death, taken miles and miles further into the woods or underground caverns as well, from which maybe they set out from. It only makes sense for any animal, again, to bring that body back, retrieve it. On the note of becoming ill, however, there are theories out there where back in the day when settlers and foreigners started traveling around, eventually made their way deep into the Pacific Northwest. Again, this isn't theory. They definitely brought disease with them. That is absolute. The theory that I'm getting at is that these diseases also affected groups of family Sasquatches, not specifically the native residents. And I think that's a very, very fascinating concept. So again, resulting in large portions of them dying off at the time. And I'm just trying to look at the cause of death as to why we haven't found these bodies and learn more about this. So if we're dealing with Bigfoot bringing their dead very far into the deep wood, traveling for days upon days, and resulting in significant decomposition in a location that the Bigfoot hold dear, I reckon that humans would have next to no idea about this location. The odds of finding a body would be next to impossible. And of course, any government extermination that occurs, I reckon they have their own body removal system as well that they would employ. But finding bones for any wild animal in the woods, it's not an easy task. I personally have found deer bones, bird, other small animals, never a bear, never a cougar or a wolverine. I mean, my God, these are exceedingly rare. And what are the odds of seeing their remains out in the bush? Common dispute I've had with people is that we should be able to see or find a body out there, but we don't see what we aren't looking for. I don't go out there necessarily all the time to go, like if we were to go camping, set up a fire and just enjoy being by the lake. I'm not intently going out there looking for cougar bones. And if I tried to look for them, I'm probably not even going to find them.
I really like that one phrase that you said, actually. That felt very powerful to me. And that was where you said, we don't see what we're not looking for.
I'm very proud of that.
I'm very proud of that. We don't see what we're not looking for, like this ad break. Welcome back, everybody. Oh, Taylor
God.
is cringing hard at that one. Whew. I was a few seconds early with that ad break, but you said such a great sentence, I had to use it.
Oh, that was perfect. I never saw it coming. Oh my God. I got a tear in my eye from that one.
Just like we never saw a Bigfoot body. So, I want to go on to the topic of how hard it is to find predator bodies. Animal bodies are pretty common. You can find deer. You've probably seen dead mice around, some dead birds, roadkill especially. It's almost always non-predatory animals or pets that you find. Out in the woods, it's exceedingly difficult to find things like bear or cougar. So let's look at those two major predators that we have here in Canada and America, bears and cougars. In North Vancouver, the North Shore Black Bear Society, Executive Director Christine Miller, talks a little bit about how rare it is to find bear carcasses, although this mostly relates to her topic of poaching. She says that in the past 15 years, she's come across 2 black bear carcasses while trying to catch poachers in the woods. Now, of course, those carcasses are ones that were purposefully killed, gutted for their important things, and left behind. But it's worth noting that those are the only 2 carcasses that she's seen in the past 15 years. Finding a natural carcass is even harder. Going to something harder to find than a bear, a cougar is even rougher. A Google search for how hard is it to find cougar carcasses pulls back plenty of info on how to catch and skin cougars in Red Dead Redemption 2. The first result for a cougar carcass in real life was actually made back in 2017 in Thunder Bay. And this may not feel terribly long ago. After all, 2017 was only 5 years ago. Way to date this podcast, Reuben. But get this. I can't say the word conservation. I was about to say conversation. I'm the conversation officer. We're talking about conservation officers, and they stated that it was the very first confirmed mountain lion carcass in Ontario. As for its location, it was next to a busy road, most likely hit by a vehicle.
Wow.
Right?
I'm still like reeling over the fact that it was the first one that they confirmed, like in the province.
In all of Ontario, 2017, we had our first confirmed cougar carcass.
That's insanely recent. I can't believe that. That is shocking.
It is. Now, imagine how recent it'll feel when we do find a Bigfoot body. But it really goes to show that finding a predatory, stealthy animal in the woods dead is highly unlikely and much more unlikely than finding a live one that knows you're there, watching you, etc. Because if you're out in the woods and you have a Bigfoot sighting, you're probably going to see one up a hill, walking away, staring at you, or if you're unfortunate enough, standing right in front of you. But you're almost not going to be walking anywhere near the spot where a carcass would be. They don't just die standing upright in the middle of a field. Something that would be sick and would creep and crawl away is going to go die somewhere where it's either alone or with family and somewhere that's not noticeable. It doesn't want to be around predators and make itself weak.
That's often what I think household cats can tend to do that as well.
They do. People who have had quite a few cats, I'm sorry for any bad memories, but cats will often crawl away, hide under a bed, go hide somewhere where they're least likely to be found, places they've never hid before, like a vent. Makes for a very, very sad event later on. So, getting into the topic of Bigfoot bodies, the meat of this episode. Please don't have a beef with me about my puns there. I'm so sorry.
I had to not. Oh my gosh, am I bad for laughing at your pun? That was so ruthless. Oh my gosh.
Now I'm making meat puns and beef puns. There's a lot at stake here, but if I made one more, I'd butcher it.
Oh my god. Oh my gosh. Continue.
Let's bring up the most recent Bigfoot body. And when I talk about Bigfoot bodies, we're talking mostly about hoaxes and unconfirmed cases. So the most recent one is one that Taylor and I talked about just this past week when I noted a Twitter post from Coyote Peterson. Now, I love this guy. He's from Brave Wilderness. He's the host of the show. He's entertaining, and he's made great videos where he climbs the pain index for insect bites and stings. Wonderful dude. Recently, he made a Twitter post full of photos claiming he found a Bigfoot skull in the Pacific Northwest, and even caught the attention of Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum. Jeff states in his Twitter post, "Before everyone gets their knickers in a knot, in my opinion, this is most likely a model of a gorilla skull obtained from a source such as bone clones or skullduggery. There is no question that it is a gorilla, not a Sasquatch or a bear. The burden of proof rests with Coyote until such a time as it is examined and possibly analyzed by a professional. It is more likely clickbait." Now, I shared this Twitter post, not Jeff's, but Coyote's, with Taylor. I was just waking up. It was the crack of dawn, and I was very excited. I was like, finally, there's some evidence, and it's by somebody notable. This person wouldn't hoax, right? Well, upon further examination, yeah, it really did look like a gorilla skull, and they have a very interesting crest at the top of their head. They don't really have the skull part of the head on their skeleton. They've got the eye sockets, they've got the jaw bones, they've got the sides. But as far as a skull goes for a gorilla, it's basically just a big indentation with a teeny tiny little peak. Now, when you look at the face of a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot and they've got the big cone-shaped head, there's clearly something more there that a gorilla lacks. So a Bigfoot skull would more closely resemble a human skull. Anyways, carrying on with the coyote topic, he later released a video about the skull, and it turned out to be a what-if scenario for fans of his channel. Not a real find at all, and a thankfully quickly admitted hoax. Jeff was right, it really was just clickbait. Which had me pretty disappointed, not gonna lie. How did you feel about that whole thing, Taylor?
I was flabbergasted because, we got multiple photos, and it was just it was too good to be true. It was just this little like ravine, and he was talking about in the post, like, yeah, he found it partially submerged. I guess the water kind of like paved the way to kind of reveal it a little bit more. And I was just super, super ecstatic. But yeah, you have to make sure you factor in a little bit of doubt, and not because you are a non-believer or anything like that. With anything, you need to make sure you know where you stand and just do a little bit more research on it. And that's what you and me do. And I mean, you executed that. We looked at what Meldrum was reporting on, and he was very honest with what he had found and observed. And then sure enough, the truth came out. And I get it. It is popularity. I mean, you're definitely going to get hits on your YouTube channel.
No, absolutely. And obviously that was the intention. Plus, it was an entertaining video for little kids and such, which his channel is very much orientated to. Now, moving on to other Bigfoot bodies, let's talk about a couple other known hoaxers before we get into an interesting one. This one is a guy named Rick Dyer, who in 2008, he's a Bigfoot enthusiast, claimed to have possession of a Bigfoot body. He only showed the body to the press, which quickly unveiled his hoax as days later, a costume shop said that he basically bought a Bigfoot body and froze it. And they looked at the frozen Bigfoot body he showed to the press and said, oh, yeah, that's our costume. Very, very clearly their costume, in fact. As the ice thawed for a couple more viewings, it started to slump and sink into itself. It became more and more obvious it was a fake, and the press barely released anything on it. They just basically said, hey, it's a hoax. We investigated this, and it was stuffed with dead opossums and slaughterhouse leftovers. Way to make a name for yourself, Rick, because in 2012, Rick Dyer would record and film a Bigfoot outside his tent eating some meat, which I've shown you in the past, Taylor. It's a very clear video of a guy at the bottom of his tent, lifts up his camera and looks out the mesh, and you can see the shoulders and up of a Bigfoot looking at some steak that's been nailed to a tree. It's a very, very clear, good-looking video. But Rick Dyer later admitted that the footage is a hoax, that the Bigfoot he named Hank was a fake, pieced together with various costume parts and special effects. Now, I don't think I could believe anything Rick Dyer puts out at this point. He has since recanted his ways and apologized and said he's only going to speak the truth, but it took him several years to admit that, so I don't think we're going to hear much more from Mr. Rick Dyer. Moving on to another hoaxer. Well, this one's less of a hoaxer, more of a jokester. Peter Kane Dog Training is an interesting YouTube channel with some interesting and legit videos, but a whole lot of videos of him standing in front of his shed with a little table and Bigfoot body parts frozen on it. I bring this up because I see it posted lots on Facebook groups and the like. If you watch any of this guy's YouTube videos for long enough, it becomes very clear that he's joking around. He's not really intending to be serious on the matter. Lots of thumbnails with body parts on display and such, and if you just click on the channel and you scroll through a bunch of these videos, there's also quite a few vulgar ones as well, which are very, very clearly a joke. But let's get into probably my favorite and most interesting body case. Taylor, I'm going to ask you, you've probably heard of this one. You know of the Minnesota Iceman?
Oh, yes.
What do you remember about that one?
Oh, it's been a good minute, but I remember seeing, I believe it was like just newspaper clippings of this thing and just the old report of it. But give me a good refresher.
Yeah, a good refresher is a great thing to have, especially after a refreshing ad break. Welcome back, everybody. Now that you've had a quick sip of an ad break there, let's talk about the Minnesota Iceman. A wiki entry of this states that the Minnesota Iceman is a sideshow exhibit, an elaborate hoax that depicts a fake man-like creature frozen in a block of ice. It was displayed at shopping malls, state fairs, and carnivals in the United States and Canada in the 1960s through the early 1970s, and promoted as the missing link between man and Neanderthals. It was sold on eBay in 2013 and put on display in Austin, Texas. Now, one thing that really interests me about this is that it was never really touted around as Bigfoot or a Sasquatch body. It's a very Bigfoot-like entity. You can look up some newspaper clippings and stuff of this thing, which aren't the real one, interestingly enough. We'll dive into that later. But it looks kind of just like a 6-foot tall, hairy human, slightly out of proportion limbs, laying in a block of ice in a pose that says, "Draw me like one of your French girls." Now, this body was originally known as the Cyberskoy creature, owned by Frank D. Hansen. Hansen claimed that he was the only one temporary ward of the body, and it originally belonged to an undisclosed owner that he just never ever named. He refused to make any reference to the original owner, just that he claimed it. At one time, he also claimed that the body had been discovered floating in a block of ice off the Siberian coast by a Russian seal hunting vessel. And later he changed his story to a Japanese whaling ship that found the body. Later again, he said that it had been found in a deep freeze facility in Hong Kong. I like how his story keeps changing. He's a very carnival type dude. New exciting stories when people get bored of the old one.
Yeah.
And later still, it was said that the animal had been shot on a hunting trip in the Whiteface Reservoir region of Minnesota. And at that point, that's where it was coined the Minnesota Iceman. For all these suggestions, the most popular idea about the body's origin is that it was collected in Vietnam and flown to the States in a big old body bag. Now, there was a couple of cryptozoologists that looked into this, Sanderson and Hevelmans, and Hevelmans connected it with the story of a huge ape killed in Da Nang, Vietnam in 1966, supposedly close to where Hansen had been stationed during the war. Now, that's not something that Hansen ever brought up himself, so it's interesting to note that a cryptozoologist that seriously investigated the Minnesota Iceman uncovered this little detail. And this is going to be interesting again later because we're about to find out some interesting things that happened during the lifetime of this body's exhibit. So these two cryptozoologists were invited to examine the Iceman along with a bunch of press and stuff in December 1968 at Hansen's home where it was being stored off-show for the winter. Both cryptozoologists became convinced of its reality. So much so that they prepared detailed illustrations and planned to have the creature described in technical literature. The body was that of a robust barrel-chested male with a thick neck and large hands and feet. Its face was broad, flattened, and possessed a short, upturned nose and prominent brow ridges. An eyeball dangled from one of the sockets, apparently resulting from a gunshot to the back of the head, and a bend in the forearm was interpreted as evidence for a fractured radius and ulna. Sanderson and Hevelmans were intrigued by its enormous hands. Its thumb was slender, tapered, and long. Its nails were flat, yellow, and of an appearance that almost looked manicured. And a heel-like pad was present on the palm's outer side, a feature suggested by Sanderson to be indicative of habitual quadrupedal behavior. Sanderson said this one here in 1969 about the pad. At one point during the examination, the glass over its case cracked. Now, this is where it gets really interesting here. When the glass cracked as they're examining this, it released an odor described as that of decomposing flesh. So we're going to move on to John Napier, who was looking at this. He's a primatologist at the Smithsonian Institution with a serious interest in cryptohominids. He was invited to examine the Iceman. He became sure that it was a latex model. Hansen's dodge for this was that he had withdrawn the original genuine specimen from display, mostly from fear, as the press were trying to find him guilty of killing what might have been a form of human. He replaced it with a model, and this was after the glass case had also cracked open and it released that foul odor and smell. Sanderson supported this by saying that the specimen examined by Napier was obviously different from the original one he and Hivelmans had examined. So they went back and they inspected the body and went, "That's weird. Why is it so different? This is clearly not the same thing. What did you do with the original?" Photos show that over the years, the form of the face and body varied somewhat. In some photos, the mouth is closed, and in others, it's open, clearly revealing a complement of large teeth. So maybe there was more than one latex model, and some of the models looked more realistic than others. But it also seems possible that as the model used by Hansen was defrosted and frozen again for each annual outing, it would have taken on a slightly different pose and appearance each time, especially if there was a real body and he removed it and then replaced it with the model. That's when you would notice the huge change in appearance. So I find it interesting to this one that's basically a confirmed hoax by everybody else. It has some surprising details in the background that seems to state that this was a quick, interesting find of a crazy monkey body man that was on display for carnivals and stuff like that. Cryptozoologists looked at it, cracked the case, released an odor, and basically damaged the body. The press was investigating at the time, trying to say that, well, if this is real, and this thing's so close to human, it's basically murder. So the owner got a little bit spooked and replaced it with a model, and eventually it became as fake can be. What are your thoughts on that, Taylor?
Gosh, I mean, that's just such a unexpected twist that I did not know about. And the spooky factor, I totally get it. You feel like you might have committed a crime. You don't want to go to jail and be arrested. And what you thought you were able to profit off of because you thought it was just some sideshow component turns out to be maybe something that is, closely related to a human being. And that's something that is, debated. If you shoot one, is that going to be contemplated as murder? I don't know. So he's afraid and he swaps the bodies out. Totally get that. Additionally, preserving something like that is going to be exceedingly difficult and probably very expensive. So when the case gets cracked and that compromises the preservation a little bit here, I can see the tribulations you're going to be kind of faced with when you want to keep this thing. You don't want to garner the wrong attention. And maybe, just maybe, there was a factor of wrong attention involved when he was maybe approached by a certain party or someone specifically in a powerful position to make something happen that he didn't want to happen, and he had to agree with it. And maybe that's even the best part of it. Maybe, hypothetically speaking, it was a real body and he was approached, and the best way to come out of it is like, hey, we're going to take this body away. And if you want to, keep doing what you're doing, you're going to swap it out with a fake body. That way, you can still make money, but you got to blow it off as a hoax. And all of a sudden the story's changing and everything like that. It's unfortunate because I don't feel like we're ever going to really know the truth. But the fact that you found that information, that is very, very enlightening.
Yeah, I actually find it quite interesting that what you just said there basically lines up with what could have happened. That's like a very likely scenario. If we wanted to try and prove this hoax is a real thing, it's probably too good to be true. It probably is a hoax. But it's really fun to believe that there's some larger conspiracy at play here during the Minnesota Iceman saga. And it's something that harkens back to a lot of other reports where they find that, there's Bigfoot in the area and black military helicopters come down. There's reports of, again, military government officials or whatever cleansing areas and woods, hunting these things, removing them. I believe there's also one we brought up a couple of times on the show and also off-cast as well, where there's like forest fires and stuff, and fire trucks have been seen offloading a Bigfoot body, something that's very clearly not human, not an animal, and they're kind of departed from the rest of the fire team, and they take a body off somewhere, and people are like, hey, what was that thing that was over there? Oh, don't worry about it. It's nothing for you to see. So there's something else at play here. I think that now that we've got these specific cases out of the way, and the majority of these remains are hoaxes and stuff like that, it kind of just boils down to the rest of the Bigfoot bodies that I could find on the internet, which are all quick costume debunks. there's very, very few cases worth bringing up. So the question remains, where are the bodies? Well, we don't have one yet. And that would seem to be the answer. Now, as Taylor touched on, I believe they bury their dead. If they are of this earthly realm, we know it takes very little effort for a Sasquatch to uproot a tree and jam it into the ground upside down. So who's to say they don't shove a body down a hole and plunk a tree on top? I guess that would make more of a Sasquatch, but... Ooh, that one hurt a little bit as I said it.
That was brutal.
Yeah.
I'm glad you kind of mentioned that again, the burying aspect, because if they do actually bury their dead, and again, I found a speculation basically that Sasquatch most likely, I mean, I wouldn't say most likely, guaranteed, they watched First Nations people and they watched settlers and just kind of observed what they did and their mannerisms. And if they see these people burying their dead, maybe they will kind of pick up on that, because there's a very few species that have been found actually observing and imitating human behavior. Orcas, elephants, dolphins, magpies, house cats, and apes. Imagine that. So I think there's a high chance that, hey, maybe they saw them burying their dead and thought, hey, that's a good way to hide our bodies. We're going to do that too.
And if they really want to hide their bodies too, whether they willingly do this or not, if they're doing it underneath trees, that's my uprooting tree theory, it would make it especially hard to find, but they're so foresty in a sense too. Maybe they just want to put some kind of marker on top. Yeah.
And I mean, marking, that's a very ancient trait for the animal kingdom. Marking territories, so why should a Bigfoot be any different?
Well, exactly. And let's continue with this and say this isn't the case. What are the other possibilities? If Bigfoot is a quantum being, according to Ron Moorhead's beliefs, and this kind of takes me back to the previous topic of them burying too, because if they're intelligent and they have a language, which the Sierra sounds clearly show they do, well, of course, they're going to have the ability to understand what death is and bury their dead, etc. But on the quantum realm thing, if Bigfoot can naturally pass away at all in our reality, there's a good chance that they just don't do it here. Maybe they go over to their other realms. They do their little quantum tunneling, portaling walk. There could be a ton of Bigfoot bodies in whatever place they go and they disappear. Or if they don't kind of flow through time normally, like I think Ron Moore had kind of brought up with us, when are they going to die? Where are they going to be? They might not be here in this timeline at all.
That's a fascinating idea. I didn't even think about that. Just kind of like jumping over into an alternate timeline of existence that whatever realm they're from, and just ceasing there. And that's why I was interested about how they die, because you don't really hear about them being, again, like I said, hit by the cars, shot at and killed by the hunters, or dying from natural causes like illness and stuff. So it would be in line for them to shift out when they know they're going to die.
Yeah. And well, Ron brought up too that they basically come here because they need this reality to reproduce in. They need to raise their young and they need to teach them how to do the tricks that they do. So the only way we're going to ever have real hard evidence of a Bigfoot body is for somebody to, unfortunately, kill one. And I don't know, maybe there's some kind of special trick here where if you shoot one and it actually dies, it goes blip out of existence. That would be cruel and unusual for us. But looking at all the possibilities and saying anything's possible, that could be one very easy, quick, tear the Band-Aid away explanation as to why we don't have Bigfoot bodies. I don't want to go with that one, though. On a more fun topic, there's the whole Bigfoot alien theory, which kind of plays part and part with everything else. Maybe they bury their dead, maybe they do this, or maybe they do that. But if Bigfoot is alien in nature, how did it come here? Who brought it here? Is there a special forces cleanup crew that kind of helps hide the evidence? Maybe it's not government or military officials. Maybe it's alien men in black. Maybe it's some other race of aliens or something out of this world that basically ensures that things that would muddle with human identity just gets hidden and buried away somewhere else or taken to another planet. And speaking of cleanup, it's about time for us to finish up this episode and clean up all of the little tidbits and flubs if we made any at all. Taylor, how about you take us away with your final thoughts and give us some plugs to leave with?
Well, in closing, yeah, I love how you capped it out with that possible UFO Bigfoot connection. We go into a deep dive of that actually in another episode. You can find that on our main feed. But all in all, the unfortunate truth and reality is that we may need to find a body, hopefully. I don't want to say kill because it'd be super sad to kill one. That would be absolutely horrible. But we need to have a body brought in to be inspected and observed and backed then by scientists and confirmed on the media, whatever you want to call it. Like, hey, here it is. It's official.
Or, a Sasquatch just walks up to a corner store and hands in his resume.
I mean, you never know. It's totally plausible, but what is the threshold before the media finally says, that's it? Not going to bullshit our way through this, and just laugh it off as a hoax or a joke? Is it the dead body that presents itself? Is it the Bigfoot sauntering into the corner store? Like, where do they cap off themselves, do you think?
Honestly, I have no idea. If Bigfoot did walk into a corner store and start working there, there's a great chance the media would just say, they're just some particularly hairy individuals. They're still people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But imagine a world where they're just a part of our everyday lives. We have these other fantastical creatures, giant beings like Bigfoot or Dogman or whatever, and everyone just kind of accepts it. Maybe some Sasquatch learn our language a little bit more so than they've learned native languages and start living in and amongst us a lot closer than we think they would now. Imagine heading to the store and just seeing one.
That would be throwing me off, seeing one in the store. But I like to think like that. I feel like it would just be a very cool shared companionship on this planet. I do think we have so much to learn from them. And hopefully the way we go about finding the truth in the body is not by our own means of execution or hunting, but we just happen to, boom, find one just right there. The skull that is in the river that's not debunked by Meldrum, and it actually isn't like a gorilla skull or anything like that, but an actual real bone that we can prove and enforce as being the real deal. So that's where I stand on it.
Yeah. I think that if we do end up finding bones, we're probably not going to find a whole skeleton. They're probably going to examine the DNA and they're going to say, this is unknown.
Yeah.
It won't confirm anything.
Yeah, unfortunately, you make a good point. And with that, we're going to close out this episode now. So you can find us. CryptidClues.ca is our website. All of our social media channels, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And again, our Patreon, where you can get ad-free exclusive early episodes and some cool little perks and rewards at our tiers. And if you have any questions or want to just say hello, you can shoot us an email, cryptidclues@gmail.com. But I think that does it, Reuben. So I guess we'll be back.
Bye-bye.